I knew the results before the technician read them. I had learned to read the room, specifically, the particular quality of silence that settles over a scanning suite when the numbers refuse to cooperate with everyone's hopes. 11 months of compatibility testing across 4 station systems will teach you that the silence before a result is different depending on what it will say. When the numbers are going to confirm a match, the attending physicians lean in. There is a collective inhalation, a gentle brightening of posture, as though something long expected has finally arrived. When the numbers are going to deny one, the silence goes flat. There is a small withdrawal from the console, a careful neutrality that the physicians arrange across their faces like a cloth over an unpleasant object. The silence in scanning suite 12 of the Vorath Shen compatibility station that morning was the flat kind. I knew it before the lead physician, Dr. Hesevar Rune, had straightened from the display. I had known it, honestly, before I lay down on the table. I was Princess Rethis Avun of the 9th House of Unathi, and I was unmatchable. This had been established at 17 by the first scan, confirmed at 22 by the second, and now at 31 was being confirmed for the 11th time by the third-generation Vetthuri Cascade system, which was considered the most precise compatibility instrument in the Outer Alliance. My endocrine signature, the very specific hormonal and genetic weaving that the Cascade system read as the foundation for a bonded match, registered at level 2 on the compatibility scale. Level 2. Level 4 was the minimum for a standard bond. Level 6 for a royal bond, which was the only kind that carried succession weight under Avannathi law. I had never registered above a 2 in 11 scans taken over 14 years. Not once. I had been examined by the best physicians in 6 systems, all of whom had offered, in careful diplomatic language, the same conclusion: that my particular endocrine structure, while not a deficiency in any medical sense, was simply incompatible with the standard Avunathi bonding profile. There was no one, they said, whose markers would resonate with mine at the required level. My court called it my condition, a word they used the way you might describe a poor crop season. Regrettable, manageable, no one's fault, but unfortunately an obstacle to planning. My 3 sisters did not call it anything at all when I was present. They had simply, over the years, stopped including me in conversations about succession. I was here because my father, the reigning lord of the 9th house, was dying. He had 6 months, perhaps 8. When he died, one of my sisters would inherit, and I would remain a princess in title, an afterthought in practice, the branch of the family that produced no heirs and therefore no alliances. My attendance at this 11th scan was a formality, one last attempt, funded by house tradition, and a faint, stubborn hope that the new Cascade system might read something different. My attendant, Counselor Wethis had spent 3 days composing the formal request to the station and had not once looked me in the eye while she did it. I was not distressed. This is important to say, not as performance but as fact. 14 years is a long time to grieve something that was never promised to you. At some point, grief recedes into something more like weather. Present, noted, not surprising. I had built a life around what I was. I ran 3 educational programs for young Avunathi who showed early compatibility irregularities. I chaired a diplomatic subcommittee that none of my sisters wanted because it required sitting through 4-hour sessions on trade tariff reform rather than attending ceremonies. I was, my father had once told me, the most competent member of his household, which was his way of saying he was sorry he couldn't give me what I deserved, and grateful I hadn't let it make me smaller. I lay on the table in suite 12 while the physician positioned the cascade emitters. The suite was white and clinical, lit by soft panels in the ceiling. There was the particular smell of medical-grade filtration, clean in a way that removes all warmth. I had been in so many rooms like this that I had stopped noticing the smell years ago. Now I noticed it, the way you notice a familiar song playing in a place you are visiting for the last time. There was a noise from the utility corridor adjacent to the suite. A panel in the wall, the kind that covers conduit access for station infrastructure, swung open. A man emerged from it, human, male, in the charcoal gray coverall of a maintenance technician, with a small headlamp still lit on his brow, and a hand tool tucked through his belt loop. He pulled himself out of the access crawl, with the practiced motion of someone who had done it many times, brushing dust from one shoulder, and looked up. He found me lying on the scanning table. I found him standing in a utility panel in the middle of my medical procedure. There was a moment that was not quite embarrassment on either side, and not quite anything else. He looked at the table, at the emitter array arching over me, at the physicians who had turned to face him. Then he looked at me, and he did not look away quickly. The way people when they realize they have intruded on something private. Shh. He looked directly at me with dark eyes that were calm and slightly tired. The eyes of someone who had been working since early in the morning, and he said in interline common, "I apologize. The station manifest showed this suite as vacant. I'm here for the conduit junction. It's been misreading the power draw, and I need to check the secondary coupling before the afternoon load spike. I can come back." Dr. Rune was already moving toward him. Suite 12 was cleared on the manifest as a routing error, she said, in the flat professional tone she used for administrative complications. The session was added this morning, at the request of House Avanathi. You will need to return after 1400. Understood. He tucked the tool more securely through his belt loop. He looked at me once more. Not practiced neutrality that officials and physicians arranged on their faces when they looked at me now. The careful, not quite pity, of people who know your diagnosis and are managing their expression around it. He looked at me the way you look at a person. Noting the emitter array, noting that this was a medical procedure, noting, I suppose, that I was a patient who had been interrupted, and offering in his expression something that was not sympathy so much as acknowledgement. You are. Here, this is yours, I intruded. I am sorry. And then he turned and folded himself back through the panel. It swung shut behind him. Dr. Rune returned to the console. The procedure resumed. I thought about the man's eyes for approximately 30 seconds, the steadiness of them, the absence of that particular arrangement. And then the cascade emitters began their calibration cycle, and I returned my attention to the ceiling panels. The scan took 40 minutes. I lay still. I thought about my father, about the last time I had sat with him in the garden of the house, 3 weeks ago, when his color was bad and his breathing labored but his attention sharp, asking me about the tariff subcommittee's progress on the dispute with the Vetthari Freight Consortium. I thought about whether I would go home for the midwinter ceremony, or whether it would be easier for everyone, in the quiet way that difficult things become easier when the difficult person is simply absent. When the 40 minutes were done, Dr. Rune stood at the console and studied the display for a long moment. Then, she studied it for another moment that was longer than the first. This was not the posture of confirming a denial. This was different. I sat up on the table, which I had not done before the results were read in any previous session, because there was never a reason to. Princess, said Dr. Rune. Voice had the specific quality of a woman choosing her words from among several options and selecting the most careful one. The scan has completed. The compatibility index registers at 7.4. I heard what she said. I understood individually all of the words. 7.4. 7 was above the Dunstad threshold for a royal bond. 7 was by the Avanathi compatibility scale, not merely a result. 7 was what the system returned for matches that the literature described as foundational resonances, the kind the old documents called once-in-a-generation readings, the kind that, in previous centuries, had ended wars because both houses would rather negotiate than deny the bond. I had been told I would never register above a 2. That is not possible, I said. My voice was very calm. The instrument has a reading error. Cascade system runs a self-verification after every scan, said Dr. Rune. The reading has verified. 7.4. I looked at the display she turned toward me. The number sat in the center of it, in the clean typographic font the system used for results. No emphasis, no ornamentation, simply the number. The way an axle simply holds a wheel regardless of what the wheel is carrying. 7.4. The sweet integrity was compromised, said my counselor, Wetha Severe from her position near the door, because she had attended 11 of these scans and needed, I think, to say something. The technician. The panel was open. The suite's isolation field was engaged before the technician's entry, said Dr. Rune. His presence in the access corridor would have had no effect on the reading. The emitter array was already calibrated. Then the result is anomalous, said Counselor Revere. It should be repeated. Certainly, said Dr. Roan. That is standard protocol for any reading above 6. We would run the confirmation scan before we would enter a result into the formal registry. She paused. Before we do, I should tell you that the system also returns a match identification. I was still looking at the number. Cascade protocol, Dr. Roon continued. When a scan returns a result above 6, the system flags it and attempts to identify the resonant source. It does this by cross-referencing with the biometric records of any registered individuals present in the scan suite or the adjacent access zones during the scanning window. She cleared her throat. The system has flagged a resonance source. I looked at her then. The maintenance technician, she said. Kavan Muir. Station service staff, level 3, 12 years posted to Vorath Shen. His biometric clearance is in the station registry. The room was entirely silent. His presence in the access corridor, said Dr. Roon. With a careful precision that I understood she was deploying to stay on the side of medicine rather than politics, was within the detection radius of the cascade emitters during calibration. The system registered him. His endocrine signature resonates with yours at 7.4. She paused once more. I will run the confirmation if you wish. Run it, I said. They found him in the station's service corridor on level 4. His name was Kavan Mura, and he was 43 years old, which I did not know when they brought him back to the suite. He came in with the manner of a man who had been told he was needed but not why. Cooperative, unhurried, carrying the small headlamp in one hand now because he had taken it off his brow, turning it over in his fingers without fidgeting, just the automatic motion of a person holding something while they wait to understand the situation. He looked at the emitter array. He looked at the physicians. He looked at me, sitting on the edge of the table now, in the white examining coat they had given me, and he put the headlamp in his breast pocket. Has someone explained the cascade compatibility system to you? Dr. Roun asked him. Not in detail, he said. I know it's a medical matching system. I've worked around it for 12 years. His interline comment was clean, unaccented, the voice of someone who had learned the language as an adult and learned it properly. She explained. He listened the way a person listens when they are genuinely trying to understand something, and not merely performing comprehension. Still, attentive, asking one question when she mentioned the compatibility scale, which was, what does a 7 represent? Because he wanted to know the context and not just the number, she told him. He processed this without apparent agitation. Then she told him his own reading. He processed this differently, not loudly. He stood, for a moment, with his hands loose at his sides and looked at the floor, not in distress, but in the way a man looks at the floor when he is doing serious arithmetic in his head. And then he looked up at me and said, Are you all right with this? With me being here for this? I had been asked many questions about my medical consultations over 14 years. No one had asked me that one. Yes, I said. The confirmation scan took 25 minutes. Kavan Muir lay on a secondary table they positioned beside mine. The emitter array recalibrated for a dual reading. He did not fidget. He folded his hands on his chest and looked at the ceiling with the particular patience of someone accustomed to waiting in confined spaces. Crawl, conduits and access panels, and the interior of station infrastructure, I supposed. I lay on my table and looked at the ceiling also. After approximately 8 minutes, he said, quietly enough that only I would hear it. Are these things accurate, in general? Do they give false results? They are considered the most accurate instruments in the Outer Alliance, I said, equally quietly. Have been tested by 11 of them in 14 years. What did the other 10 say? Level 2, a pause. Pumps. This one said 7.4. Yes. He did not say anything further. Neither did I. The emitters ran. The ceiling panels were the same pale gray as the ones in every medical suite I had ever lain in, and the light was the same filtered white, and the sound of the equipment was the same low harmonic I had heard 11 times before, and none of it felt the same as any of those times. And I could not have said precisely why, except that the room felt inhabited in a way scanning. Suites did not, as a rule, feel inhabited. The confirmation came back at 7:06. This was a higher reading than the initial scan. This was unusual. Dr. Round explained, in the even tone she had maintained throughout this consultation, that confirmation scans occasionally returned slightly elevated readings when both subjects were in direct physical proximity, because the cascade array was able to read the resonance directly rather than inferring it from a single biometric in range. 7.6. The record in the station registry for the highest Avunathi reading in 40 years was 7.1. Cavan Murray sat up on the secondary table, swung his legs over the side, and looked at the floor again. Then he looked at me. His face was weathered in the way that faces get when a person has spent years working in the kind of environments where the light is artificial, and the air is filtered, and the work is physical and solitary, not aged in a way that diminished anything, but marked, written on, the specific kind of face that had been somewhere and done something, and had not been particularly interested in how it appeared while doing it. I don't know what the right thing to say is, he said. Neither do I said. This was true and felt. Reasons I could not immediately articulate, like the most honest exchange I had had in a very long time. What followed was not simple. Second, I want to be precise about that, because this particular story is one I have been asked to tell many times in the years since, and it has been told other ways by people who were not present. People who prefer their versions cleaner, more convenient, obstacles smaller, and the resolution faster, and the human male more obviously destined for what he became. I have let those versions exist because I understand why they are told that way. But here is what actually happened. My counselor, Wethis Avir, requested a private consultation with me before we left the station. She was a careful woman, loyal, experienced, and I had trusted her for 11 years. She sat across from me in the consultation room off the suite, with her hands folded and her voice steady, and she told me that House Avunathi could not, formally, act on a match result with a station maintenance technician, not because of any rule she could name. The Avunathi compatibility law required only that a valid scan result above level 6 be formally registered and considered. But because there was no precedent, and because the political implications were significant, and because my father was dying, and an unresolved succession was not the time to introduce a complexity of this magnitude, I listened to all of this. You have used the word complexity twice, I said when she had finished. What you mean is that it is inconvenient. I mean that it is not straightforward, she said. 11 years of compatible but too low results were straightforward, I said. This is a 7.6. If one of my sisters had returned a 7.6, you would have had the formal registry entry filed before she left the building. Wethis Avir looked at the table between us. I am not asking you to argue with me, I said. I am noting the distinction. Do your job, Wethis. File the confirmation. She filed it. The result went to the Avunathi registry. My father read it that evening in the garden, a data tablet my sister delivered to him, with the expression of a woman handing someone a defective package she had not packaged. He read it twice. Then he set the tablet on the table beside his chair and looked at the garden for a long time with the careful attention of a man, reviewing the full contents of his life. I sat with him. He did not speak for several minutes. The evening light was long and gold across the garden paths. 7.6, he said. Yes, the highest in 40 years. The record is 7.1. He was quiet again. Then tell me about him. I told him what I knew, which was not much. 12 years at Vorith Shen, maintenance technician, level 3 clearance, 43 years old. Interline common spoken with the clean precision of someone who had made the language his own. I told him that when Cavan Moore had come back to the suite and been told his own result, his first question had been whether I was all right with his being there. My father listened to all of it. He asked if you were all right, he repeated. Yes, he nodded. Not the nod of a man approving something, but the slower nod of a man placing something in a category he already had, firming a feeling rather than forming one. What do you want to do, he said. In 41 years, no one in my family, and very few people anywhere, had asked me that question with that particular weight. Not what does the law say, not what is the sensible path, not what can we manage. What do you want? I thought about the ceiling panels and the emitter harmonic and the man who had folded his hands on his chest and looked at the ceiling with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting. I thought about the directness of his eyes, and the single question, "Are you all right with this?" that had cut through the entire architecture of the consultation to the only thing that actually mattered. "I want to meet him properly," I said. My father said, "Then we will arrange that." We met 4 times over the following month, which was the minimum the Avunathi compatibility protocol required before a formal declaration could be entered. The meetings were held at the station. Because Kavan Mura was not a man given to ceremony, and I was not, that month, interested in performing the version of myself that ceremonies required. The first meeting lasted 2 hours. We sat in a room near the station cafeteria, a plain room, pale walls, a table with water and food that neither of us ate much of, and talked. He asked questions with the same careful directness he had used in the scan suite. Not probing, simply interested. What the compatibility system actually meant in Avunathi practice. What a formal match declaration involved. What my life looked like. He did not ask about my condition, which surprised me, and then he explained, without my having to ask, that it seemed to him like something I would have already explained if I wanted to, and that it would take a particular kind of presumption to press. I told him anyway, because his restraint had earned it. The endocrine irregularity, the 14 years of testing, the succession implications, the way my court had arranged themselves around my unmarriageability, the way furniture gets arranged around a structural pillar. He listened to all of this without the careful arrangement of expression. He looked at me the way he had looked at me in the scan suite, directly, noting, as though I were a person in a room rather than a configuration of problems to be managed. "That sounds exhausting," he said. "Not poor you. Not I'm sorry. Not the practiced compassion that people deploy when they want you to know they have heard you, without necessarily engaging with what you said. Exhausting." "It is," I said, and felt something release in my chest that I had not realized I was holding. The second meeting, he brought a data reader and showed me photographs of the station's lower infrastructure levels, because I had asked what his work actually looked like. Not the formal description, the actual thing. He showed me conduit maps and junction diagrams and photographs of the particular access crawls he spent most of his time in, the ones with the inadequate lighting and the outdated coupling systems that the station administration kept promising to upgrade and kept not upgrading. He talked about the work, the way people talk about things they have done long enough that they have stopped performing expertise and simply know it. Plainly, with the occasional dry observation about the gap between how systems were designed and how they actually behaved. There was a particular section of Level 7, he explained, where 3 different generations of infrastructure had been layered over each other, without anyone updating the master schematics, which meant that the official maps of Level 7 were approximately 40% accurate, and the remaining 60% required being learned by being inside it. He had spent 2 years learning Level 7 by being inside it. He described this without complaint. The way you describe a terrain you have become expert in, with a certain possessive satisfaction in the knowledge. The way a person who has mastered something difficult tends to speak of it, once the difficulty is past. I found this interesting in a way I had not expected to find it interesting. There was something in the plain specificity of it, in the fact that he was describing real work in a real place that he actually knew, that was different from most conversations I had in a professional capacity, which tended to involve either the managed performance of expertise, the careful positioning of information, or both. I told him about the tariff subcommittee. He was interested in the trade biomechanics, in the specific way that a person who works with the physical infrastructure of a station becomes interested in the movement of goods, practically, from the ground up, wanting to know what actually moved through the conduits rather than what the policy document said about it. We spent 40 minutes on a specific freight loaf dispute that I had spent 3 months trying to resolve, and at the end of it, he had identified a structural misalignment in the data reporting that my subcommittee had missed entirely. Because none of thought to ask a maintenance technician how the physical loading protocols actually worked. The loading staff used an informal tally system that differed from the official manifest entries by a consistent margin because the official manifest required entries at point of departure, and the loading staff logged at point of secure storage. And the two were not the same point, and no one had reconciled them in 11 years. I filed an amendment to the subcommittee report the following morning. The third and fourth meetings were shorter and more ordinary, is to say, they had the quality of time spent with someone you have already, without quite deciding to, begun to trust. Purposeful but comfortable, without the performance that new acquaintances often require of each other. At the end of the fourth meeting, which took place in the same plain room near the cafeteria, I asked him the question I had been forming since the scan suite. You could have declined, I said, when they came to find you. When Dr. Roon explained the reading, you could have said no. He considered this with the seriousness it deserved, which meant actual consideration and not the quick reassurance that people offer when they want to close a question. I could have, he said, but you'd had 11 scans over 14 years that gave you nothing, and this one gave you something real. He looked at the table, then back at me. It seemed wrong to walk away from something real because it was inconvenient for me. I thought about my counselor's word. Complexity. Inconvenient. Court considers you a complexity, I said. Courts usually do, he said, without apparent resentment. The flat observation of someone who has worked around institutions long enough to have no illusions about them. It's all right. I know what the scan said. So do I said. The formal declaration took place 8 weeks after the scan, in the 9th House Registry Chamber. My father was present, thinner, slower, his color worse than it has been in the garden, but present, seated in the chair, at the head of the registry table, with his back straight and his attention precise. My 3 sisters were present. My counselor was present. The House Registry officials, the compatibility verification staff from the Vorathshen station, the Avunathi legal counsel, all present. Kavan Murray arrived in a clean version of his station coverall because he did not own formal Avunathi attire and had declined to borrow any, which he told me beforehand without apology, and which I found, in the context of everything that's accumulated over those 8 weeks. Exactly right. He walked into the registry chamber with the same unhurried bearing he had walked into the scan suite. Not performing composure, simply possessing it. He nodded to my father, which was respectful and direct in the same measure. My eldest sister, Kethis Avun, who would inherit the house, and had spent the previous 6 weeks arguing, through her counsel, that the reading was anomalous, said, when Kavan Mura had taken his position at the registry table across from me, the House cannot sanction a bond between a princess of the Avunathi and a station maintenance worker. This is precedent we cannot establish. Silence, not the flat silence of a denied scan. A different kind, the silence of a room that has been holding a specific unspoken thing for a long time and is now watching someone say it aloud. Kavan Mura did not look at my sister. He looked at me. Question was in his eyes. Do you want me to answer this, or do you? And I was grateful for the question, and grateful for the trust behind it, and answered it by looking back at him, with something I did not try to compose. My father spoke. He spoke from the chair at the head of the table, team, and his voice was diminished from what it had been, lower and more deliberate. It filled the chamber the way certain voices fill rooms, regardless of their volume. Not through force, but through weight. The Avunathi compatibility law, said my father, does not provide exceptions based on occupation. A reading of 7.6 is a reading of 7.6. The record has stood at 7.1 for 40 years, held by your grandmother, Kethis, whose bond to Lord David Avun was considered the finest match of her generation. He looked at my sister. The instrument has spoken. The House will follow what the instrument says. Kethis Avun said, Father, the instrument has spoken, said my father, again, with the final quality of a door closing, gentle and complete. My eldest sister looked at the table. Then she looked at Kavan Muir. Then she looked at me. Whatever she saw, she made a decision about it in that moment. I could see it, the small internal adjustment, the calculation completed, and she said nothing further. The declaration was filed. The compatibility bond was registered. 7.6, Rithis Avun of the Ninth House of Unathi and Kavan Mura, Station Maintenance Technician, Vorath Shen, Outer Alliance. The date and the names and the number recorded in the house registry in the clean typographic font the system used, without emphasis or ornamentation. I looked at my father. He was looking at me with the expression he had worn in the garden 3 weeks after my 31st birthday when he told me I was the most competent member of his household. The expression that was his way of saying certain things he had no simpler language for. I looked at Kavan Muir. He was looking at the registry display, at the number entered there, with the same expression he had worn in the scan suite. When the confirmation came back at 7.6, the serious arithmetic expression, the man doing the honest accounting of something real. Then he looked at me, and the arithmetic was done, and what was left in his face was something quieter and more direct. He said, 7.6 said, yes. He nodded once, the nod of a man confirming what he already knew. My father died 4 months later in the garden. On a morning when the light was the same long gold, it had been the evening he read the tablet. My sister Kethis became the ruling lord of the Ninth House. She was competent and careful, and had made her decision about the bond in the registry chamber, and she honored it. Not warmly at first, but correctly, which was enough. The educational programs I had been running continued. Muir came to one of them 3 months after the declaration, at my invitation, to talk to a group of young Avunathi who showed early compatibility irregularities similar to mine. Young people who had been told, or were afraid they would be told, that they were unmatchable. He talked to them about the work, about the conduit maps and the junction diagrams, and the gap between how systems were designed and how they actually behaved. About how you spent years maintaining the infrastructure, and then one morning, the manifest said a suite was vacant when it wasn't. You folded yourself out of a crawl panel and looked up, and something in the universe recalibrated. He was not eloquent. He was specific and patient and honest. And by the end of it, the young people in the room were very quiet in the way that people are quiet when they heard something that has adjusted a basic assumption. Afterward, walking back along the station's service corridor, the same one where they had found him that first afternoon, he said to me, "Did that help them?" "I think so," I said. He nodded, satisfied with that, which was characteristic of him, satisfied with what was enough, not requiring more. I thought about what I had said to my father in the garden. I want to meet him properly. What it had meant by the end of those 8 weeks, and what it meant now, and the distance between the two meanings. Not a contradiction, but a deepening. The way a room looks different once you have been in it long enough that it becomes familiar. The conduit junction, I said. On level 4. Did you ever fix it? He looked at me with the slight tilt that meant he was parsing whether I was being serious. He had learned to check this, having discovered in the first few weeks that I was, frequently, being serious when it would have been funnier to be joking. 3 days after the scan, he said, there was a misread in the secondary coupling. The station had been compensating for it in the load distribution for about 6 months without realizing the original reading was off. A misread, I said. The junction was telling the system it was drawing less power than it actually was. The system believed it, adjusted for it, made sense of everything around it, based on a number that was wrong. I thought about 11 scans over 14 years. About a reading of 2, confirmed and reconfirmed. A number the entire system of my life had arranged itself around for so long that the arrangement had started to look like truth. And when you fix the coupling, I said, the real reading came through, he said. Everything had to recalibrate. He paused. About a day. A lot of alerts at first, things flagging as anomalous because they were reading a load they hadn't been expecting. Then it settled. And it was fine, I said. It was fine, he said. Better than fine, actually. The system ran cleaner once it was working with the real numbers. We walked in the filtered light of the service corridor, the same pale gray above and the same clean smell of filtration. And the station moved around us with its load and its maintenance schedules and its 10,000 small recalibrations, all of it ordinary and all of it running on numbers that it trusted to be true. I thought about my father's last afternoon in the garden. About the long gold light and the compatibility result on the data tablet and the question He had asked me that almost no one asked. What do you want? About the face of a man doing honest arithmetic and finding that the numbers checked out. Kavan, I said. He looked at me. Thank you for not going back for the junction at 1400, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the manifest had it wrong. I would have had to come back anyway. I know, I said. Thank you anyway. He looked at me with the dark, calm eyes that had been steady in every room I had seen them in. The scan suite and the plain cafeteria room, and the registry chamber and the garden, and here, in the ordinary corridor of a station he had maintained for 12 years, carrying his headlamp in his breast pocket. You're welcome, he said. That is the whole of it. 7.6. A conduit junction that had been misreading for 6 months. Chic. And a maintenance technician who came through the wrong panel on the wrong morning, and a number that the system had always been capable of producing once someone was finally in range for it to read. I have been asked, in the years since, whether I think it was chance. The manifest error, the timing, the suite scheduled at the last minute, whether some larger pattern was operating. I don't know. I am not by nature a person who finds satisfaction in that kind of accounting. What I know is that the reading was real, and the man was real. And when he looked at me in a room full of people who had spent 14 years, arranging careful neutrality across their faces, he simply looked at me. That was the beginning of it. That was enough.